I did give full credit for that question though about Emerson and Thoreau with Manus Machine. All right, our week 7 checklist. We've got class. We've got poems this week. We've moved from nonfiction and essays to poetry. So we have poems from William Cullen Bryant, Henry, what is his name? I can't even think of it now. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, thank you. They all have 3 names for some reason.
I know, what is that?
I don't know. It's something about the Romantic period. You have to have 3 names.
It's like serial killers. They don't have 3 names.
You know why serial killers get 3 names? You ever think about that?
I wondered about it.
It's usually so that, okay, like give me an example of a serial killer that gets the 3 names.
John Wayne Gacy.
Say it again.
John Wayne Gacy.
John Wayne Gacy. All right, so they usually include the middle name just in case there are a few John Gacys out there, so people don't look at them like, dude, you must be a serial killer, right? Usually it's kind of to say like, no, this is the right one, like the one with this middle name. But I don't think that's why they did it during the Romantic period. I have no idea where this comes from.
I caught on to that early too. I think. What?
Yeah, and then you've got Edgar Allan Poe, right? So another 3-name guy. Walt Whitman, just a 2-name guy. Emily Dickinson. So those are the poets we're going to look at this week. You've got a quiz that's due by Monday and a discussion forum that's due Thursday by midnight. So I think we should take a look at that first because you only have a few days to work on that. But before we get to that, I want to give you my introductory video. It's very quick. And this is for Romantic period poetry or poetry in general.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?"
It's a pretty cool commercial, right? And I actually just realized there's some irony to this because the Romantics during the time tended to be anti-materialistic, and this is a commercial for an iPad, right? So anyway, but that was quoting a Walt Whitman poem, and Whitman is one of our poets. The poem it was quoting, I'll pull it up for you. This is the poem that he was quoting. He didn't quote the entire thing, but this is part of it. Anybody recognize that voice, by the way, in the commercial? Do you know what it's from? Very good. Robin gets bonus points. Robin Williams from Dead Poets Society. It's pretty interesting, and I tend to agree with the sentiment of his little monologue there. We don't read and write poetry because it's cute, and that's what a lot of people tend to believe. They discount poetry as something fluffy or, I don't know, kind of worthless or feminine, and I would disagree with that. I think it's pretty important because it expresses something which he says is beauty, which I think is one of those things that separates us from the animals and gives us our humanity, the ability to recognize and appreciate beauty and to create beauty too. Although, have you ever seen the elephants that can paint? you think they know what they're doing? You think they're attempting to create beauty? Have you ever seen the elephants that can paint? They put the paintbrush in their trunks and they dip it in the paint and they paint. You've never seen that?
Makes you
Do I have to pull up more YouTube videos?
Yeah.
Or like, I don't believe it.
I've seen dolphin experiments where they do stuff like
Okay, no, I haven't seen
I know that my employees work.
I have not seen an elephant painting an elephant before. I've just seen him making a bunch of marks on them.
From anywhere.
Whoa. He's letting his employees work from anywhere.
That way they can be more productive
Now we can act more productively.
and work from everywhere.
Even home. Your opportunities don't have to be theirs. Cisco Security.
And y'all want to hear a joke? So an elephant with a paintbrush walks in. Hold up. Wait a minute. What?
Free elephants can do. Some elephants can do like this.
You're too loud.
Yes, but this place we have to three of them can have pictures because
What is
because
that
they
elephant
bright
doing?
and
What is he concentrating so hard?
okay, let's see them to take a picture and listen to music too.
Elephant painting. What is he painting? Picture there. And he dancing. There ain't even no music. Maybe it's the she, I don't know. There goes some music. Oh my goodness. That music is so calm. Shoot, I'm about to start painting up in the gym. What the heck? Where's my paintbrush?
Alright, we don't have 12 minutes.
Another
But
picture.
to painting the picture is not every elephant can do.
That's pretty interesting. I've never seen that. I've seen elephants like making like marks on the page, but that's.
That's pretty wild.
You think that was real?
They think
I don't know, I didn't see the whole 12 minutes.
They what?
they capture an image in their head and their brains are like huge.
Yeah, they say they have really good memories too, right? That's pretty impressive. So maybe art and beauty is not something that separates us from the animals. But anyway, poetry is an expression of beauty and art. So it could be important to our humanity. And this is a really good example, maybe to start with, when we talk about Romantic period poetry or poetry in general. Because remember, nature, art, and the self are the three driving concepts of this time period. Nature, art, and the self. And I think the outline of American literature says that the Romantics started to look toward art as an ability to express universal truths, right? Art can express universal truths, whereas the people during the Enlightenment or the Revolution were looking toward science to figure out what's true, and the people prior to them were looking toward religion to figure out what's true. So now they've found art as maybe a way to reconcile these two. But if you're looking for truth, it means you have questions about what is true, and what is this, or what is that, or why is this, or why is that. This poem right here is asking a question. This poem asks the question kind of like, is there an actual question mark? I think there is. It says, of the questions of these recurring, O me, O life. He's addressing something here. He's addressing himself like a self-reflective thing, like, oh me. You ever think like, oh, why the hell did you do that? You ever like, do something stupid and ask yourself that question, oh, why did you do that? Kind of talking to yourself. I think in a way he's kind of talking to himself here, oh me, oh life. But that's the oh me part. Oh life is a little bit different though. Have you ever been in a really bad situation and thought, oh life, why are you doing this to me? Some people might fill in the word life with God. So I think he's addressing himself, which is the nature art self part of it. But I think he's addressing something bigger than himself too. You could call it life, you could call it God, you could call it the universe. So he's addressing these two things, and he says, of the question of these recurring, what questions do people ask life or God or the universe? What are the big questions that human beings have?
Where did we come from?
Where did we come from? Why are we here? One of his here is, here it is. What good amid these, O me, O life? What good am I? Like, why am I here? What is my purpose? I think that's what he's saying when he says, what good amid these? What good amid, and he's talking about the plotting sordid crowds, all the foolish people, and who than me is more faithless? Like, of all these people, like, what good am I? What is my purpose in life? Why am I here? That seems to be the question he's asking. And, fortunately for us, his poem delivers an answer. Not just the question. So, what is the purpose of life? Here you go. You just learned it in American Lit. On a Tuesday morning, you just learned the purpose of life. Isn't that, we can go home now. I don't have to keep going. I mean, has anyone ever come to any, like, definitive conclusions? It didn't look like we got any from the Revolutionary period. Not that I can see. You know, maybe we had some from the Puritans, but it was a pretty straightforward answer. Like, God was the answer, right? The answer is God. So here's his answer, that you are here, that life exists in identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. It's not a perfect answer, it's not incredibly clear, but it's an answer nonetheless. It's the answer that Whitman came to. Maybe it's an answer that you can make some sense of. You say, like, what good am I? Why am I here? Walt Whitman seems to be saying because you are part of something bigger, right?
Like speaking a part in a play almost.
Yeah, and that's that idea. You can find that idea in Shakespeare too. He says, like, all the world's a stage, and the people on it are merely actors. So you're just an actor in a play, which is actually what? Because the world is not a play, literally speaking. We talked earlier in the semester about the two things that make poetry poetry. One of them was musical language, and the other was figurative language. Right? Here you have an example of figurative language, and what kind of figurative language is that? You say the world is a play. What kind of figurative language is that? It's a comparison, comparing the world to a play. It's a metaphor, right? So one of the things that makes this a poem is figurative language and the use of a metaphor here. So the purpose of life is for you to contribute to the play. Contribute a verse to the play. Contribute a scene to the play. Because without you, we wouldn't have the same play. That's an answer, right? Anybody ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
So
lost it.
You lost it? It gives the answer to the meaning of life, right? You remember it?
That's a good question.
The answer to the question of, like, what is the meaning of life or something? Like, the answer is 42. I don't know, 43 or some sort. 42? I don't know what that means. And they don't really explain what it means in the book either. But. So anyway, there's an answer. If you've been looking for the answer to the meaning of life or your life, that might be it for you. But this is a play, and what I'm actually doing right now is what you're going to have to do for your discussion forum. And that is explicating or analyzing the poem. So one of the things you need to look for is, actually I'll take you back to it. You need to look for figurative and literal language. I'm sorry, figurative and musical language. Because those are the two things that make poetry poetry. So when I look at this, I saw the metaphor here, which makes it poetic. I also see some musical language. Does anybody see musical language? Stuff that might appeal to your sense of hearing or sense of sound.
Is it meter? The way the meter works?
Okay, it could have meter, and it depends on how you're kind of reading it in your head right now or how you hear it read. But meter is kind of the rhythm of the poem. Does it have a rhythm or not? And that could depend on the particular reader. If you see it, you're going to have to try the best you can to describe it. Sometimes you can catch the meter just by the length of the lines. Like if you have like long line, short line, long line, short line. Sometimes that can indicate meter. Sometimes the punctuation. can help indicate meter, because that can give some rhythm or cadence to it. So if you see meter, you're going to have to do the best you can to describe where that meter comes from, instead of just saying it has a definite meter. Sometimes it does have definite meter, and you can actually count the syllables of the words. Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter is what it was called. And there were, I think it's 10 syllables or something to every line. Can you imagine writing a whole play and making sure that every line had the right amount of syllables? That must have been really difficult. What's that? Yeah, it would. Quickly. So sometimes you can find it by the number of syllables too in a line. But if you see meter or rhythm, that's definitely musical language, because that's appealing to what you hear. I see something else in this poem for sure.
That's musical?
That's musical. And it's obvious. Y'all are going to see it right away. Yeah, repetition, right? Of this, of repetition is something we hear and kind of appeals to the way we hear a poem or hear these thoughts coming across. So repetition, possibly meter. I don't see any rhyme. That's usually the first one we look for with poetry because it stands out. But I don't see any rhyme. If there, let's see, is there any alliteration? Is the repetition of initial consonant sounds like wild waves of water? Sometimes that's something that'll stick out that you can see. I don't think I see that here. This is interesting. Of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. We wouldn't typically speak that way, right? So the way that he worded that, the rest me intertwined, instead of, you know, with me being intertwined with the rest or something. The way he kind of switches the language or inverts the sentence. Anybody ever see Star Wars? Yoda always inverts his sentences. Speak strangely, Yoda does, right? So that's kind of interesting, and that's something that we might hear. All right, so we're looking for musical language, we're looking for figurative language. There's another example of maybe, let's see, personification. Anybody see the personification? Personification is figurative language, and it's when you give like a human attribute to something that is not a human.
The eyes craving.
That's the one that I saw. Because eyes don't crave anything. Eyes are just little pieces of, I don't know, membrane and flesh, tissue. So eyes that vainly crave the light. Your eyes can't crave anything. People crave things. So that's personification right there, and that would be figurative language too. All right, so what we're doing now is explicating the poem. We're analyzing it. And that's what you're going to have to do. Not for this poem. You're going to get to pick which poem you do. You also might want to look at who is the speaker of the poem. The speaker is like the narrator of the poem. We call it the speaker. Is it Whitman, based on what you know about the biography? Because usually there's a little biography for every poet that you're going to look at. So you can make a determination, and you could assume that it's the poet, or it might not be. In this case, it might just be a generic person who's questioning his or her life, right? But you can tell who it's directed to, I think, by the first two lines. It's directed toward the speaker, him or herself, and directed at something bigger, at life, or whatever represents life for that person. Does that make sense? So you're looking at all these different aspects of the poem, and you're going to do the best you can to explain them to me. Now, there is not one correct interpretation of the poem.
Thank you.
You can look at this any way you want. Now, let me qualify that, though. If you see it differently, or if you have your own interpretation, you have to support it with evidence from within the poem. So if you're going to say the speaker of the poem is probably a frog, you are entitled to that interpretation. However, what in this makes you think it's a frog? Because it talks about, somewhere in here, the plotted and sorted crowds. I mean, are there crowds of frogs somewhere? You know, like, what are you pulling from this to give you that interpretation is what I'm interested in. If you have something that you think might be a little bit, I don't know, a little bit original.
Try to validate whatever you want.
Yeah, validate. Because there's not a wrong reading of a poem, but there are strongly supported readings and unsupported readings. You know, like I could read this and say, oh, this was written by a Martian from Jupiter who was, you know, on the moon and saw crowds of frogs. Like, that's not really supported by anything in the poem, so it wouldn't really be a very good explication. Does that make sense? But as far as finding the musical language and the figurative language might be somewhat subject to interpretation, but the musical language is pretty straightforward. That's pretty objective. It's either there or it's not. The words either rhyme or they don't. There's either repetition or there's not. Now with meter, there's more subjectivity as to how you hear it or how you would read it. But you could still support it based on punctuation or length of the lines or whatever. Does that make sense? Is this intimidating? No? Okay, let me show you the specific instructions. Can you read that back there? Can you see that? All right, understanding the deep meaning and subtleties in a work of poetry is not always easy. Many people struggle to get past the obvious and therefore discount poetry as nonsense, boring, abstract, etc. However, when it comes to expression through language, poetry can be just as effective as prose. Remember, we have prose and we have verse. Prose is ordinary language, verse is musical language. That's the only difference. And it's often more effective at, especially at expressing emotions. Our society does honor poets and songwriters every year in a televised event that draws millions of viewers, the Grammy Awards. So if you like music with lyrics, technically speaking, you like poetry. This week's discussion is designed to help you better appreciate poetry and share some understanding that you have with the rest of the class. Alright, in your original discussion post for this week, you're to select one poem from the week 7 assigned readings and explicate it. Explication is just a fancy word for analyze, explain. It's a type of literary analysis that examines how individual elements of the poem contribute to the overall meaning or the theme. That's where it gets difficult. So finding the musical language, finding the figurative language is actually the easy part. The hard part is taking that stuff and saying this is how it contributes to the lesson or the theme of the poem. That's the tricky part. That's really tricky. If you can do that, I'll be impressed. If you can find the musical language and the figurative language and maybe figure out what the theme is, that's good enough. You'll do just fine. If you can actually connect the figurative and musical language to the theme and start to show why these things create this lesson, that's really good. That would be impressive. All right, so maybe let's go back to our example, Oh Me, Oh Life. What is the lesson or the theme of the poem? Theme has to be a direct lesson, too. When I say theme, like if I said what's the theme of Romeo and Juliet, I'll have 9 out of 10 people say love. No, love is not a lesson. Unless it's a directive, like, hey, go out there and love one another, right? If I just came up to you and said, hey, love, today what I want you to do is love. That's a lesson. That's a directive, right? But just as an idea, if I say, what's the theme of Romeo and Juliet? People say, love is the theme. Like, now that's just an idea. It has to be like a statement. It has to be a lesson. What's the theme of Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss? Don't act like you don't know.
Try new things.
Try new things. That's a lesson, right? And lessons themes have to be universal in nature, which means they have to apply to all people at all times in all places. So the idea of try new things, that could apply to someone from the 1600s living in Iceland, right? That could apply to someone today living in Oakwood, Georgia. So the theme of Green Eggs and Ham would not be, make sure you try green eggs and ham one time in your life. No. Some people don't have access to green eggs or ham, right? So that wouldn't be universal. It's got to be broader. So going back to our example, what could be the lesson of this poem? Now, lessons, this can be subject to your interpretation as well. This is not a right or wrong answer. But what do you think the poet wants the reader to understand after reading this? What is the lesson the poet is trying to teach us?
Seems like frustration trying to figure out the answer.
Okay, so what do I take from that? What is your directive to me after reading this?
Be like
Your life matters. That's pretty good. That could be a lesson that I could learn from this poem. Maybe don't worry so much about the frustration. Maybe there is an answer.
The fact that you put an answer there that doesn't really clarify an answer.
So then what's the lesson you get from it?
That he's maybe worrying about nothing.
Okay, so then the directive or the theme would be, don't worry so much about these big questions.
Yeah, try not to waste too much time, I guess. or something.
Okay, perfect. Don't waste so much time thinking about these big questions. Perfect. All right, so you saw two totally different things, but they're still themes, and you can still support them with what you read in the poem, right? Wonderful. That's all I'm looking for you to do as far as finding the theme. Now, if you can figure out how some of that figurative language and musical language ties in, that'd be awesome. That's not easy to do. That's the hardest part.
See that because it gives you the answer, and just once you got the answer, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay? So you've taken your theme a step further? Okay, good. Okay, excellent. All right, so it says the first step is to do the assigned reading. Basically, read the poems that you were assigned. They're not lengthy poems. They're not epic poems that you've been assigned this week. So you should be able to do all the readings. Maybe today in an hour or two, if you have time. I know an hour or two is tough to come by, but at some point you've got to do the readings. Once you've finished, you need to choose a poem that you think you understand on a significantly deep level, something you connect with. And it doesn't have to be the one you like the most. It could just be the one you feel like you understand the most. So you might like one that you don't understand. Sometimes I like songs that I don't really understand. You know, I have no idea what the guy's singing about, but I'm like, that's a pretty cool song. I kind of like that. And maybe I like it because I don't understand it. Sometimes I really like movies where like it's a mystery. And you don't really get a conclusive answer.
Hitchcock.
There you go, Hitchcock. So you will pick the one that you want to explicate. Probably pick the one you feel like you understand the best, or the one you like the most. Either one, doesn't matter to me. You do want to find one where you feel like you understand some of the historical or social influences that may have inspired the poet. Think about nature, art, and the self. Do you see those elements shining through the poem? If so, that might be a good one to try to explicate, because you can make connections to the time period, which is Romanticism, and you know that the people placed a great deal of emphasis on nature, art, and the self. So I could take Whitman's poem, O Me, O Life, and say, the poet is addressing himself. The poet is concerned with his place in the universe, which connects to the Romantic period, because this was a time when people placed a great deal of emphasis on themselves and their places in the universe, like Emerson did. Right? I'm making connections now. Next, read the document on how to analyze poetry in the Week 7 folder. Finally, write a brief explication. I say no more than 500 words. About 500 words is good. I'm not giving you a minimum. The minimum discussion post is usually 100 words. It's going to take you more than 100 words to explicate a poem in a decent way that people can connect with. 100 words is not going to be enough. You're going to have to go further than that this time. But no more than 500 words. So it doesn't have to be a formal essay. I'm not asking you to do a works cited page, although I do want you to cite lines from the poem if you quote lines from the poem. If you say in line 4 when he says the sordid crowds, put that in quotes and quote Whitman in an in-text citation. But you don't need a works cited page. You don't have to create this as a Word document. You can just type your response in the discussion post. Does that make sense? So it's not an incredibly formal exercise, but do cite the poem if you're using language from the poem.
So poetry side is different, right? By the line, stanza.
It is. It is. So instead of page number, you can do line number. That would be fine. But since you're going to title your discussion post with the title of the poem, you just use the poet's last name. That's good enough. You could use line too. That'd be helpful, especially if it's one of the longer ones. That'd be good. Talks about the quotations. Should be cited with in-text citations. You don't need a works cited page. This says Friday. I need to change this. That should say Thursday at midnight. That way you'll have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the first part of Monday if you need it to respond to 2 other people. Just like you would in the first. We did a discussion post already, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay. Was that graded yet?
I haven't even said.
Okay. If it's not, I need to grade that.
What about essays?
What's that?
You look at any essays?
Next week I plan to grade your essays.
I was just worried about it. So I'm fine.
Do y'all have any questions about this assignment? I've done some of this with you with that example. I was explicating, I was saying, here's what I found, here's what I think it means. So that's what we were doing when we looked at that O me, O life phone.
Sort of like a literary analysis.
It is, it's a specific type of literary analysis. What's Thursday's date?
First, I think.
We'll go with that. Alright, so y'all think you know what you're doing? Close enough? You get to pick any poem you want. If you pick a really popular one, like Edgar Allan Poe, I think I assigned The Raven. That's a longer one, but if you pick that one, be careful not to do too much outside research, because it's going to influence your reading of the poem. You know, like, I want your original thoughts behind it, regardless of how wacky they may be. I want your original thoughts, and I want you to try and support them with evidence from the poem. And the goal is, the ultimate goal is for you to do this explication to give someone else in the class maybe a better understanding of the poem. So maybe Robin reads Thanatopsis and doesn't get it. Stephen reads it and does get it, writes his explication. She reads that, responds to say, I understand it in a new way now. I didn't see that metaphor. That makes a lot more sense. That would be your response to his explication.
Just don't cuss me out.
No, cuss him out by all means. That would be wonderful. You're allowed to disagree. Like if you pick Thanatopsis and Ashley read it too, she could see it totally different from you and say, I actually saw it this way, this way, this way. You want to be respectful, but disagreements are fine, especially with poetry. Does that make sense? Y'all think you can handle that? All right, maybe give it a try before Thursday's class, and that way we can talk about, actually, definitely do your readings before Thursday. You can try your explication if you want, or if you want to wait till Thursday, we can talk more about the poems, and then you can do your explication. It's up to you. I think on Thursday, though, I'm going to cover Thanatopsis, and so after I cover Thanatopsis on Thursday, I might take that one off the table for an explication, because I'm going to go so in depth with it that I don't want you to do the same thing. So if you want to do Thanatopsis, do it before class on Thursday, and I'll let it stand. But I think after class on Thursday, I'm going to take that one away from the choices. Fair enough? All right. See you all on Thursday.